And a running segment that I'd like for us to do for this whole retrospective for each album, pick a word of the day, you know. And I think there were a few candidates for Milk Eyed Mender, but my favorite was Poetaster, or I think that's how you pronounce it. Spelled Poetaster, which basically means a shit poet, and I think that's really good. A person who writes inferior poetry.
I love that. I think that's amazing. I love that there are words for things like that, where it's just, it's like, I wonder who came up with that. I wonder when that became necessary.
Like poetry diss tracks of the 17th century.
Fucking Shakespeare just getting riled up in the Globe.
Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're ticking all the boxes and bringing a much-needed minority perspective to popular internet discourse. I'm Josh, my pronouns are he and him, and I lead the music discussions.
My name's Matty, my pronouns are she and her, and I lead the film discussions.
And once a year, we like to do these deep dives, these retrospectives on a singular artist. On the music side of the show. So last year we did Kanye, which I think was epic. It spanned like 8 albums, I think. In only the course of 14 years.
I think we did 10. I think we reviewed 10.
Is it 10? Jesus.
Yeah, well, and that's not including Watch the Throne.
which isn't a real album, so I don't acknowledge it as real.
It's not part of the canon.
It's not part of the canon. And you know, our journey with Kanye began in 2004, you know, and so, you know, I thought it'd be really cool to go to another artist whose debut album came out in the same year, Joanna Newsom. Her album, The Milk Eyed Mender, also came out in 2004. A very different type of artist to Kanye, I guess. Amazingly, like, she only has 4 albums, and they've been working for the same amount of time, which is telling, I guess.
That is the different kind of artist, and it really conjures up the question, why do people get so annoyed when Kanye doesn't drop an album? Because he always drops albums. He drops an album like
consistently every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and people are like, yo, when's the next Kanye? And then you've got Joanna Newsom and like Fiona Apple, who just like 7 years later and release an album. And then it's...
So yeah, I thought it'd be fun to go and do Joanna, who, in my mind, her kind of discography, kind of similar to Kanye. Actually, I'm really horrified by the parallels I'm drawing of Kanye and Joanna here, but this is the podcast lore, I guess.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like 2010, like 2004 to 2009, Joanna Newsom is like the first era of her career, in the same way that like everything pre Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is the first era of Kanye. And I feel like in 2010, both were kind of thrust into like this huge kind of amount of fame, and kind of the music was getting so much more attention, and they were like such a bigger presence in pop culture, I feel like 2010 and onwards. And I really feel like that second half of Joanna's career is very distinct from the first half. So I really do view Ease and Milk Eyed Mender as almost like companion albums, and then the second 2 albums as in their own kind of realm.
Yeah, visually, just looking at the album artwork, I completely see what you mean.
I know what you mean. Like the album cover for Ease honestly looks like an old CRPG or something. Like,
yeah, totally. Like completely text-based RPG, and that's just like one of the bitmaps it's got. Yeah, that's mad.
But yeah, Milk Eyed Mender. Usually in a retrospective you have these like context bits, but like Joanna's life, I think, has been kept a lot more private than Kanye West. And she's less of like an aggressive presence in the world. That like Kanye is just this force of nature.
Yeah.
Even if you don't, so like there was less to dig up I guess.
Right. It's
Regarding
more
Milk Eyed
fun
Mender.
facts than like a biographical kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like you can do with Kanye because it's all just out there for you to see.
Yeah. So I guess to give some faint background, like when she was a teenager, and I got this from the Chris Tinkham article called Joanna Newsom, Persistence of Vision. She came out upon the release of Have One on Me, where he interviewed her and did a bit of a biographical write up on her. And yeah, when she was a teen, she wanted to be like a solo classical performer. But got like really freaked out by it. Like her mother took her to loads of like conservatories to audition, and she just like really fucking like it was really freaky, and she hated it. And then to the point where she got like the envelope in the mail from like one of the conservatories of like, did you get in? And she just burnt it because she was like, if I didn't get in, then that's gonna feel shit. But if I did get in, then that's also gonna be horrifying.
Yeah, because it's like I have no reason not to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to like work really hard and get amazing grades, which would be like, for something I maybe don't want to do. Yeah.
Wow, I'm very impressed. I feel like dramatic life choices like that don't come as cinematically as that very often. So wow, that's kind of crazy.
I one thing I think is interesting is her response to how like in the zeitgeist her music was received. What your preconception of Joanna Newsom was, or if you had any, and like if you had any history. Because in the zeitgeist, like she was very much viewed as this like a quote unquote elfin princess or wood nymph, And her songs are viewed as like fairy tales and nursery rhymes, and like babyish and youthful, like very like infantilizing, condescending kind of descriptions.
Yeah.
And she was like really frustrated by that because when she looks back at like the work she was doing on Milk Eyed Mender and Ease, like she never really viewed it that way as like this really quaint, cutesy, almost garish thing. Like, so she was really like jarred by that presentation of her. In the zeitgeist, I guess.
I didn't have that idea of her at all. Honestly, just from the impression I have of her, because I've never listened to any of her music, from you, Josh, is one of quite majestic, really. Like the way you've always talked about her music is like it's such a huge impact on you. And you've always talked about her alongside, I think, people like Fiona Apple and
Julia Holter.
Thank you. And Julia Holter, these, very like these women that are very like technically skilled, but also like really very authoritative in the strength of their voice. And it's just really sort of troubling to hear, like having her being put into that box. It's just, of course, that is what media did, and I do think the 2000s were a particularly like brutal time for boxifying artists, and but just the tabloid culture then was so fervid, it was actually insane. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that she was put into that box, but that's very frustrating. That's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, I guess another tragic part of like the box putting is how like for the longest time, if you were a female artist, you were either compared to Kate Bush or Björk. And then after like Joanna Newsom became huge, you are now compared to Kate Bush, Björk, or Joanna Newsom.
Right.
Which is really depressing.
There
3 women artists, and everyone else is like a subgenre of those 3.
No, that's so true.
And my history of Joanna Newsom, a lot of my inundation into music was through like shit posting pages in my teens. And I remember like, from ages like 14 to 15, the album cover of Ease was always in people's like charts of like their favorite albums. Ease was a very like popular album in the indie scene. It was sort of, up there with like, In the Airplane Over the Sea and OK Computer as like albums that are like everyone has heard basically.
Yeah.
In the indie scene. But I was a filthy Spotify user back then, so I didn't have access to her music, and so I never like really got to listen to it. And I remember when I felt particular kind of almost religious guilt and shame about this was when in 2015 I so distinctly remember Dive was coming out and all the press, all the journals just hailing this as like this amazing, beautiful, groundbreaking album, and I couldn't listen to it, because I was on Spotify.
That's so bleak.
So yeah, back then she was this kind of like epic harp lady to me.
Yeah.
Around the end of the sixth form, I finally got Apple Music. And the big selling point of that was like I finally listened to Joanna Newsom. So yeah, finally got to get into her, and it was really the first year of uni where I had my full Newsom awakening, which is always kind of a cultish religious experience when the first time you're like on your own and you decide I'm in the mood for a specific Newsom song, and you realize it's like infected your brain.
It's found a place inside your brain.
100%. So like going back, especially the first two albums, they really feel like campus music to me because I used to listen to these all the time walking around the campus. So that's sort of my history trying to do some. So I'm a huge fan of her music. I think she is God's gift to Earth, and I'm super excited to talk about it with you and see how it hits you. So yeah, Milk Eyed Mender, her first album. How did you find it?
Okay. Don't hate me. I did not hate this. I have a lot of respect for this artist, and I think she does amazing work. But I'd be lying if I said I got a whole lot out of this. I really, when you're listening to something and you're just like, oh, I'm such a piece of shit. Why don't I like this? To be honest, I found its stripped back sound really hard to engage with, and I think I just want to make it clear to anyone listening that I'm very much not a person that engages with quite stripped back music, folk, and like singer-songwriter stuff. I honestly don't listen to a lot of, because I know exactly what makes that genre good, and I know why people love it, and it just simply doesn't work on me. And to describe what that is, for me, when I listen to like folk and albums like this, and I'm not getting something out of it, what I imagine is this really enchanting feeling where all the little nuances in the instrumentation and the melody are so much more meaningful because of how laid back everything is. So you end up in this really quite relaxing and almost like hypnotic mindset where, you really pay attention to all these wonderful details, and that close attention you pay to everything means that it becomes a huge part of you, because every time you listen to it, you're so vigilant and you're so focused on it. And I think that's lovely. And but for me, my brain simply doesn't work that way. And I know that's not a very interesting review, because I'm effectively just saying like brain broke, can't relax. but when with music like this, I find it very hard to not let my mind wander, honestly. And I feel like that is antithetical to what this album's doing. And so yeah, it really left me feeling cold, is ultimately how I'd put it. And with an album that's so consistent in its sound and so consistently laid back, that became it's not the most enjoyable experience.
That's interesting.
That's
really interesting, because to my experience with this album, I find this album to be really like diverse and dynamic and tense and stressful. Like it's not relaxing for me. And even the relaxing moments subverted by like really depressing lyricism and a really sharp vocal performance. So I think for me, when you talk about those like keying into those little details that kind of get you, I know what you mean, because that's how I kind of experience it. It's like on Bridges and Balloons, it the the part at the end where the plucking becomes a bit more pronounced and this like rhythm kicks in of like
oh yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh my goodness, like that for me, that's just like,
well, that's
spiritual. That's like
no,
it completely bowls me over. And
you're describing exactly what I mean about the genre, where things that to me are really mundane and like essentially don't cause a emotional reaction in me. I imagine that for people that enjoy this genre, because it's like a scale, because everything's on this so much smaller scale, it's almost more impactful, stuff like that, because it's so, you're brought into this tiny little world, and when there are these great changes in the melody, it changes everything, instead of just it being like a pitch change in the third verse of a rock song. It's the song completely changing in this tiny little world you come to understand. But just for some reason, for me, this again scale of songwriting just has never. I've never been able to nestle into that place. I've never been able to just let my mind wander into this journey.
Yeah, I find it interesting what you say about scale, because I feel like wow, we had opposite reactions to this. Because I feel like this album is just humongous. Like it feels scope, and it feels epic and tremendous, and that's probably like lifted by the imagery that's employed.
Yeah.
The opening, the sight of bridges and balloons make calm canaries irritable. Like I imagine kind of this opening up to this just like almost like steampunk fantasy world. As a metaphor for like love is getting away together. But there's also, for me, in Newsom's music, lyrically and musically, always a sense there's an impending doom constantly. And I read like the running metaphor throughout the first two albums as being this sort of abyss, this endless ocean that is gonna drown you and will kill you and is coming, and this whole thing is just constantly trying to push it back, with like love and memories and memories of love and holding on to something. But it's this constant imagery of ocean and water and wreckage and darkness that's just looming and ever present. And I found both lyrically and musically this to be of quite grand scope, and the sparseness that she described as small, the kind of how sparing she uses instrumentation, to me adds to the scope. It feels sprawling.
Your mind fills the blanks, or not even fills the blanks. It's almost. We're gonna make a comparison here that sounds bizarre, but the quiet epicness of Breath of the Wild, where I don't know, that's what it conjures up for me, is like that understated but at the same time very majestic presentation kind of says more by saying less. What you're saying to me about this album is so appealing. Like I really love the way you're talking about it, because I love things that find a way to play off of your initial conceptions. So yeah, the way that this could seem like a very small scale, understated thing, but actually it has these really grand stories and grand imagery within it. I think another artist that does this really well is like Open Mike Eagle, who like using the like lackadaisical, just like stupidity of every day, kind of manages to tell these really like far-reaching and impactful stories. But for me, it's just this scarcity in this, and definitely like the instrumentation she uses as well, because I don't know. I just don't think my head's in that space right now for that kind of scene. Ultimately, that kind of like need to escape with your love, that kind of yearning energy that her music has, despite how like kind of ill-fated it can be.
Yeah.
I do find that very appealing, and there's some really gorgeous imagery that I do want to talk about in my favorite tracks.
Yeah, I think this describing it as a yearning really characterizes this, and I think lots of her lyrics flip flop between these deep expressions of love and then like then death looms above everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think this is really exemplified in in the song Sadie, which is ostensibly about like her dog, right, who died. But I think also, you know, there's a larger metaphor here just about how fleeting and temporal life is. There's this metaphor of the dog bringing her this bone that it's burying, it's trying to keep and preserve, but it keeps like gnawing at it, and she keeps repeating the words like, you know, gnawing kind of throughout the lyrics here. This idea of like, I guess life as a bone that we perpetually gnaw at. We can't help it. Anxious, we have to gnaw at it like a dog would, you know, like for comfort. And eventually the bone's gonna run out, right?
Yeah.
There's this line, until then we pray and suspend the notion that these lives do never end. You know, it's all about this kind of moment of living as just a suspension of death, right? Which is very like Heideggerian idea, I guess. But it pervades everything she writes. You know, she sings the line, "It burns irrevocably." That's such like a chilling image. But that contrasted with the dog, this is highly interpretable. But the line when she says, "And down where I dawn with the milk-eyed mender, you and I, a love so tender," I kind of think of the dog as the milk-eyed mender, and like milk-eyed. I've seen online people thought of this as like a blind fortune teller, like milk-eyed is like blind and mender is like weaving, you know, beginning of Dark Souls 2, you know, weaving the yarn of fortune. But I thought of milk-eyed mender as like milk is just like, you know, this big dog pouring eyes at like pools.
Yeah, it's all slobbery and like bale-eyed. Yeah.
And mender is just like someone who will mend you with love, and like a weird dog will constantly comfort you. And that placed right next to this like chilling death imagery, and the fact that this dog is dead and they're burying the dog is just, oh man, it's just everything. Like, like, I adore that aspect of this album.
No, I think that's really lovely, but more than lovely, I really respect. You know what you said has really reminded me of what you said in the beginning about how the like critics, or I guess like the general public image of her was constructed as this kind of small, quite like sweet and like sort of fairy tale teller. But actually, yeah, a lot of these stories are really like twisted and convoluted and hard to follow and dark. And yeah, it makes me so frustrated because I really adore that type of storytelling of juxtaposing like really dark elements with really beautiful truths about being human. I mean, Midsummer is one of my favorite movies, you know, like, and I don't know, it's definitely like a woman thing.
And I think another thing in terms of that, like the juxtaposition of the whimsy and the dark, I think she plays around with like fantasy and dream logic a lot in her lyricism, I find, which is like directly contrasting with the actual instrumentation. Like on Cassiopeia, I think Cassiopeia, she talks in interviews about how she wanted to like reclaim harp music in the mainstream as like, this can be very artful and beautiful, and remove the image of harp music as like kitschy, gross, kind of something you hear in like an advertisement or a rom-com as like a punchline, right? And like Cassiopeia has like the most classic lullaby-esque like harp sounds, which are the most like generic harp sounds. But it's used on this track about her being like unable to sleep next to a lover who she doesn't trust. Like the mattress tensing vexes her completely, and the way she says completely, like she really enunciates it, like it's so it's gross and finicky. And she describes the person she's sleeping with as his meaty mitts can't hurt me, and his snores unwound it. Like, and all this time you have this like saccharine, almost like mocking lullaby harp music going through it, right? Like, I find this very stressful to listen to.
Yeah, what about this is nice?
And the image of her finally trying to get to, the water is a recurring image throughout the album, and there's a kind of this raging outside, almost like Lovecraftian body that is coming and will take you. And she thinks of like raging waters and a lonely sigh, and her trying to get to sleep is trying to quote unquote clasp at Cassiopeia, which is describing like sleep as trying to literally hold constellations of stars. Is gorgeous, That's such like a destructive, horrifying, but also like whimsical image, right? Which I really love.
Oh, that's so real. Yeah.
And with the water thing, I think where I really get this kind of, if you read through the lyrics, I think it's constantly recurring, but I think it really opens up with this idea of the bridges of balloons, the idea that she's setting off with a lover, and the quote, ships are fallible, and a nautical, like all things fades. The idea that on water, this boat will drown eventually. The water will take it. But if we can like attach it to balloons and like do weird steampunk stuff and like fly it away, we'll be okay. But of course, like that's fantasy. It's not real.
Yeah.
And the line, oh my love, oh, it was just a funny little thing to be the ones to have seen. Feels to me like remembering a relationship after it's ended, kind of idea that for a brief moment, this window of like, hey, we don't have to, the incoming doom of the water can't take us. We can escape into this fantasy steampunky world. For a brief moment, we saw, love or this beautiful, pure thing. But snap back to reality, and it's just like looking back on that, and this like juxtaposition between oncoming doom, this inevitability of losing people and of people dying and love being lost, contrasted with brief openings into like fantasy and where nothing can die. That's a lyrical theme that I find really moving on this.
No, that's beautiful. I think that there's just such a sense of tragedy amongst all of this. Honestly, at the end of the day, it all ends up feeling a little bit queer. Just in terms of that, I feel like in queer stories, there is just such a fixation on like tragic yearning, and for me, this her music really follows this. And so yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, I guess contrasting blending the aesthetically appealing and satisfying and lush with gross, sad imagery. Like there's this line in This Side of Blue where that song opens with like a very wistful, peaceful, like old Western American plains and field sound. And then we get this line, I do not know my own way to the sea, but the saltier sea knows its own way to me. Like, this whole album, she's being chased by the ocean. Like, it's gonna get her. It's so intense. It's so good. And in the final track, I love how this whole thing concludes with, like you said, like blending. And you said you see this a lot in queer narrative, blending the loving with the macabre, right? It's very gothic, right? The line like describing your lover is like, your skin is something that I stir into my tea. and I'm watching you, and you are starry, starry, starry. And the way she screams out starry, 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 it's like so visceral and like palpable as an expression of like adoration. And then it ends with that, this sea that has been chasing her throughout the whole thing. In my opinion, is a symbol of like an abyss that is going to take us eventually. It ends with the line, waltzing with the open sea, clam, crab, cockle, cowrie. Will you just look at me? Like this ending of like the sea's finally coming to take her, and she can't get this person's attention or affection. It's just so heartbreaking, and the grandiosity of this album's lyricism and, in my opinion, sound is always contrasted by this very like just small, just tiny human interactions of like struggling to sleep next to a lover you don't trust, or starting to get to the attention of your crush at the store, or like your dog dying. It's just very good.
Aw. When I heard "Starry, Starry, Starry," I was like, "That is such a Josh lyric. That is such a." I knew you were gonna highlight that at some point.
So good, and this line oh god, normal lyric writing isn't this good. Like, there's this line about in Clam, Crab, Cockle, Cowrie, about like she describes the sky, and I imagine this is describing like clouds, as God with a sword mincing up the morning, slightly bored. And there's this like effortless grandiosity to the clouds, but it's like procedural. It happens like every week, and it's for a god it would be boring, right? And she sings about like sometimes there are nights where the sky looks like a road, like we're inevitably ending up there in the sky, aka death. I love that. You can move on to favorite and least favorite tracks.
Okay, lovely. I want to start off with Swansea. I just adore the way that the harp wraps around the lyric "Poor, poor, the wild, wild night." For me, it just immediately conjures up images of like a girl in the first act of her sort of like fantastical journey, trapped in the constraints of a sleepy home village. In that moment, the harp is just so, it's just so like moodily and mysteriously played, and it's calling her out into that night almost, that it seems to be really embodying that call into exploration. And I just really love that.
Fun fact, I got it from the Genius. The part where she screams like "Ho Swansea, Bottom Willow, Lagunitas, Ho Calico." These are actually I was like, man, she's doing some incantation shit. But these are actually abandoned towns in California, which gave me the idea that this whole and there's the line, all these ghost towns are wreathed in old loam. There's this, and it starts with the line, oh, if you want to come on down with your bones so white. It sounds like she was just hanging out in like abandoned towns and like saying, I just get like freaked out.
That is that's fucking freaky.
It's a really gothic track.
Next up is Sprout and Bean. I just really adore in the song's latter half those incredibly quick and sort of syncopated harp notes, but they're so smoothly plucked that it's just so infectious and enchanting. And it really felt like a taste of what I felt like the album is trying to conjure up for me, which I was really grateful to find on this song.
You can feel her fingers throughout the album.
I completely agree.
So intimate. And
it's so vivid.
There's a really cool reading of Sprout and the Bean as it being about abortion.
Wow.
The idea that what's the difference between the sprout and the bean, and you can ask the counselor, you can ask the king, and they'll say the same thing. And the idea that it's like, when does the baby become a person that that you can't abort anymore? The sprout becoming the bean, sorry, the sprout that comes from the bean. When does it stop being a bean? And you can ask the king, you can ask the counselor, like men giving their opinions on when you're allowed to have your abortion. kind of
No,
thing.
exactly, and they'll
And
say
then
the same thing. Yeah.
yeah, and then the kind of ending of the song, where it's danger, danger, drawing near them with a white coat, danger, danger, the broad bow, again, the water imagery of like taking something into the hollow chatter of talking tadpoles. The idea that I imagine this is like going through the abortion and imagining casting this kind of unborn child into water, like imagined, dreaming seamless dreams of lead.
Wow.
Which I think recurs in the next album. But yeah, I think that's a really cool reading of the track.
Yeah, I think that is really, really great. So finally, is Peach Plum God, Peach Plum Pear, because this seems to be a really like a story of like naive, what's the word? Unrequited. Thank you. Unrequited love. There's this like maniacism almost to that vocal style, and but the unhinged way she sings Plum Pear is so like infatuating and like charming, and then like that expectation crashing upon the realities of existence, which like so much of this album is about. I think it works really well, that like musical reference point for this. So those are my favorite tracks. My least favorite song was my least favorite track is Sadie. I simply find the song aimless structurally. I was not looking for saying like bad things about this album. And like here, like I heard that in your voice, like that hurt. I'm sorry. I want you to know that I think I'm wrong. Like I'm saying these things and I'm like,
it's okay.
No, but I mean it. Like I was listening, I don't like this, but I have a feeling I'm wrong. So
but don't you think I don't think it's aimless though, because it builds up this like melodic repetition, and then that completely drops out, and it's just isolated all that we built and all that we breathed and all we split or pulled up like weeds. Like this idea that the melody is always dropping out to this imagery of slow dying. Like I don't. I think that's sort of like purposeful rather than meandering.
That's a very good argument. It's a very good argument, and one that I won't disagree with. So those are my favorite and least favorite tracks.
And do you recommend the Milk Eyed Mender?
I'm gonna give this a weak not recommend.
Fair enough. Sure thing.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. So I'll go through my favorite tracks. So first up, Bridges and Balloons. Next up, I have On Galop, which is a really stark and sort of devastating track. And I think it's where that kind of juxtaposition between the fantastical, whimsical aesthetic and the dark, mournful subject matters really comes to play. I think that's like some genuinely like haunting imagery of like a fantasy world decaying. There's a line, and the halls were lined with the disembodied and dustly wings which fell from flesh gasplessly. And I imagine like fairies who have been like long since dead. Their wings are just like hanging around on the walls. And to me, the song is about like an artist confronting the economic harshness and realities that have no art but yet infringe on art. She sings "And you laws of property and you free economy," which really sticks out like a sore thumb among all this like lush, beautiful imagery, just kind of brute, just kind of economic language, right? And she says, "Never draw so close to the heat that you forget you must eat." I take this as kind of about like like my art is a product. I have to sell it so I can eat. I can't get too excited about like doing crazy shit because I need to sell this. Like I need to eat. And the way that art limits, art is made product, and reality infringes on not reality is in like the economic world.
The material conditions.
Yeah, the material conditions, exactly. And that line that recurs throughout the track, and it beats me, but I do not know, and it beats me, but I do not know, and it beats me, but I do not know. I love that. Again, it's this album's so ominous. It's just this like vague, anxious, sick feeling of precarity, right? You know, that the ground could fall out from underneath you. So I think this is an epic Marxist song, and that's my reading of it. And finally, my last favorite track is Peach Plum. I adore this song, and I really love how piercing and sharp the harpsichord in this song is. It's so grating and anxiety-inducing and huge. It almost feels like an emo song in terms of like intensity. Even though it's so far from that genre, and her almost shrieked vocals are just really like upsetting to me, and the final I am blue and unwell, like Jesus. Yeah, my least favorite track is the Book of Right On, for like really superficial reasons. It's just not as much of an emotional powerhouse as the rest of the album is for me. And also, like, it was popularized by The Roots. They sampled this song, and that song got really popular. I think The Roots are really boring. They're one of the biggest like rap groups in the world, and I just never understood them. So I associate this with the frustration of like not getting The Roots. So I don't like listening to it anymore. But I really like the line, "I killed my dinner with karate." I think that's a really good line. So yeah, I'm gonna give this a really strong recommend. I love the plucky homespun coziness of this album, and how it's able to be absurdly ambitious regardless of that like homespun pluckiness. I didn't expect when I came to Joanna, I was expecting something that sounded like Ease, like completely grand and lush and like impeccably produced. And I was so surprised at how like almost lo-fi this was at points. It reminds me of the Microphones Glow Part 2 or Whether Days Come In, like taking like very like stripped back lo-fi production and doing something just insanely like epic and ambitious in my opinion. And this is just a mind-blowing debut, and I adore this album. So yeah, very strong recommend. That concludes the first episode of our Joanna Newsom retrospective. And Matty, what are we doing next week when we go back to Filmland?
So yeah, next week we're going to be talking about the new Riz Ahmed film, Sound of Metal. I think that's been Academy Award nominated now. So that's about a guy, a metal drummer, who starts losing his hearing, and it's just about him dealing with the consequences of that and losing it's about losing one of your greatest passions in life. We love Riz Ahmed. That's what we're going to be talking about.
Cool. So yeah, catch us next time with that, and follow us on social media, and see you later.
Thank you. Goodbye.